There we are. We're live.
Look at us. I know
Hello,
I'm alive.
world. um. Oh, what song is that? Help! I'm alive. My heart keeps beating like a hammer. Metric. Metric. Have you ever heard of Metric?
That sounds like a special thing that I'm not aware of.
It's a band. I like them.
I feel included in that.
I mean, I think they're on most streaming services. You could listen to them if you want. I'm not actively trying to disenfranchise you from this conversation.
Why are you pressuring me to be who you want me to be?
I'm not a part of your system. Ooh. Man.
Systems. Am I right?
So I threw it on the ground.
Plugged in like pods, you might even say.
In one's ears.
Cogs in a giant system, powering it like batteries. Just a triple A human being.
But we can't actually mention which batteries they are because that would be a licensing issue. Okay, I am putting the thumbnail up. I am putting the descriptions. I'm doing the things on the YouTubes. Is it doing it? There it is. There it is. We're going to add it to the playlist.
What if we just started combining like all the batteries into one thing? We said like Duragizer or NSL.
Why would we do that?
So that we don't run into licensing issues.
Just to make a kind of like not real battery that is a real battery.
It's the Duragizer.
You have a golden mouth, by the way.
What?
The way the light is hitting you. Yeah.
Ooh.
You've got a golden mouth.
Everyone needs to listen to what I say from now on.
Oh man, how are you doing?
Give me cookies.
Cookie.
I'm well, man. I'm doing well. We're doing the COVID thing still. Yeah. But we're still, hanging in there. We're hanging in there.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's going out there in New York. Have not been looking, but here in Arizona, we're definitely seeing cases go on the rise.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. It's happening. Yeah, it's happening all over the place, unfortunately. It's funny, right? Because a couple of weeks ago, our mutual friend Joe, who's a doctor in Oklahoma, was talking about how the hospital that he works at had no beds available, and there were no beds in the rest of Oklahoma or all of Texas to send people, and things have just been building in a negative way for a while. What was it, yesterday? Right, we set the record for daily deaths, or more people died yesterday of COVID than on September 11th. Just one of those really gruesome, terrible milestones that we hit. Yeah, it's bad, man. Feels bad, man.
Everyone in the medical field that I've spoken to has been like, our hospital is full. This is a serious thing. When I asked about it too, one of my doctor friends was just like, if you get it, will you die from it? Probably not. You'll probably be fine. But is there a pretty good chance that you could give it to someone who would? Absolutely. And is there a good chance that you could be hospitalized and take a bed away from someone who has a stroke or a heart attack? And
yeah,
it was like, that's so. Yeah, man, it's a real thing.
Yeah. And that's the thing to keep in mind too, right? For the vast majority of us, this is not about us fearing for our lives. This is about us hopefully not getting sick and unintentionally passing it on to somebody who will die or suffer long-term consequences, because it's not just about death. There's 30% of people who have COVID have long-term lung scarring and permanent, pneumatic issues. But also the fact that,
Sorry,
go
ahead.
No, and the fact that if all the hospital beds are full because people are there with COVID, when you have a car accident or you have a heart attack or whatever it is, there's nowhere to go. So it's just being prudent. A little bit of precaution now will go a long way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to do. I get the anti-pansies and the, wanting it to be over thing. I do.
Yeah.
I really, really do.
Yeah.
It's hard.
No, it is. It is. And it's frustrating. And there's a lot of layers to the frustration, I think. People who feel let down because like their businesses have closed, and people who feel lied to because, the guidance has changed over time. Like there's just a lot of feelings in the air, and distrust of systems, and feeling like the wool is being put over their eyes, right? There's just a lot of stuff going on. So I don't know. These are just weird. 2020. It's been a year.
Yep. And it's looking like it's going to stretch 2021 too.
Yeah.
Maybe we can just so we don't taint another year. Maybe we could just call this 2020 part 2, or 2020 again.
Addendum.
20. Yeah.
The
extra
appendix.
Innings. Just extra innings.
Extra. Okay.
Looks like he's going into extra innings.
And then when everything is good, that's the walk-off homer that just
yeah,
ends
exactly. I want
Mike Trout will come in and save us.
Mike Trout.
That's the one baseball player I know.
Yeah. Mike Trout sounds like a guy. Also, what's funny is that the Angels formerly had a player named Tim Salmon, which is I don't know. I guess there's just a fishy team over there going on. Pretty fishy over there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just waiting for Jim Sashimi and
Also, I don't know if they're still called the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, but there's a lot to unpack if that is indeed still their name. The Los Angeles Angels, which means literally the Angels.
The city of Angels.
Yeah, so there's the Angels, the Angels of Anaheim.
Yeah.
So this is confusing too, because Anaheim is its own city, not tied to Los Angeles, nor is it even in Los Angeles County. So it's a very confusing thing going on, the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, which makes zero sense because they are just the Anaheim Angels, because Anaheim's its own place. You could call them, I guess, the Orange County Angels of Anaheim. But the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim is outright wrong. It's just wrong.
It's brought to you by the Department of Redundancy Department.
It is. The Angels. There was a movie a few years ago called Mickey Blue Eyes. I don't know if you ever saw it, with Hugh Grant.
No.
But it's he ends up joining, he marries or falls in love with some Italian girl whose family is mobsters. Oh. And they own a restaurant called the La Trattoria. And so the sign says the La Trattoria.
The restaurant.
Yeah, the that means, he's like, that means the Trattoria.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, forgive me, I grimaced as you were saying that because I just had some very old coffee. I'm out of fresh coffee, so I just had pulled some old coffee, and that's all I have. A shout out, I've been getting my coffee the last couple of months from Reverie Roasters in Wichita, by the way. I just want to shout them out for having delicious coffee. Yes, this is not, unfortunately, this was I had too much of a gap between shipments, and it's just yuck. But anyway, not to weigh this down with more bad news. What's some good news? You did a good thing yesterday.
I did. I gave a Zoom young adult talk to a community in Houston, which was a lot of fun. And I'm actually going back for part 2 next week, which is cool that they didn't get tired of what I had to say. So they're like, let's do it again. And
you're doing extra innings of your talk.
I am. But yeah, hopefully it was, I think it was recorded. I don't know if it'll be posted. If it is, then maybe we'll deal with that as something we can share as time permits, or if they permit. So yeah, it was good. Talked about the real meaning of Christmas.
Commercialism.
Is getting as many things as you possibly can cram into the back of your hatchback. So And it's very important that it's in a hatchback because there's just a lot of issues with gravity of trying to keep everything in there. So yeah, but hopefully those will be, postable. And
Cool.
other than that, Christmas is coming. Yay.
Yes. Christmas is coming. Things are going to be weird with Christmas, right? We've talked about this before. It is interesting that COVID cases spiked like in Lent leading up to Pascha, and now they're spiking again in the Nativity fast leading up to Christmas. Just interesting times. And like maybe there's an ascetic component to all of this. That's like something for us to think about.
Yes, perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Forgive me for looking down. Father Andrew Damick called while we were on this. So hello, Father Andrew. I'll call you back when we're done.
Dropping some names.
That's right. We're like this.
I know people. I know people who have names. I know people with names.
First, middle, and last.
And last. I'm the kind of guy who knows people with names.
I also know people who have first names and place names. They're bishops.
Oh, wow. Fancy pantsy, huh? Rubbing elbows with bishops and places and things.
First name of place. Yes. No middle, no last. Just name and place.
I'm going to start referring to myself as Christian of Tempe. That's just what I'm going to start doing.
Okay. That is very, it's very deliciously pre-modern.
Indeed. Here's a fun game that maybe, I don't know, is irreverent, but it's fine. If you were going to be canonized as a saint, what do you think they would call you? Like Saint Stephen the...
I think Stephen of the flowing locks, because without my head of hair, I would have none of this.
So you're sort of like a Samson situation?
Yes. And right now, like I'm trying not to cut it because this is where my strength comes from. I will not be able to podcast if I cut my hair.
How much can you bench? Kidding.
This much.
I was going to say whatever you can do, I can do more. If you said like 10, I can do more.
I do a lot of body weight exercises. I don't even know, just body weight exercises, isometrics. It's my core.
Name one exercise you do. This
jazz
one.
Hands. I do a lot of jazz hands.
This one.
Yes. It's called the chicken dance. I do that every now and again.
It's all about the external rotation of the shoulders. It's
yeah. It's plyometrics.
It's fine. I don't want to get too swole though, so that's why I don't lift heavy.
Yeah. No, I'm all about like high reps, leanness.
I just want to get toned. Just toned.
Yeah. Which I'm also not doing a very good job of.
Yeah.
I gave a little sort of like, this is 2020, right? One thing that I've discovered in the midst of the quarantine is bread baking and banana bread baking. And I've been doing a lot of like just carbo loading, and there's no race at the end of the carbo loading. It's just carbo loading. And I gave a talk recently and I wore this suit that I hadn't worn since like January, and it was loose in January. And then I wore it a couple of weeks ago and it fit like a glove. And it's like, That is
congratulations.
Loaves of bread. So many loaves of bread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been doing a lot of like abdominal stuff lately because I've been working on my 6-pack, but lately it's been turning into more of a beer keg. So it's
hey, gains.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening in the world.
Approaching middle age is fun.
No, it's not. The narrator. No, it's not.
It wasn't.
Christian was lying through his teeth.
Well, I don't have anywhere else to lie from. I can try.
I'm going to grimace again. Speaking of coffee, by the way, we are going to be getting some new coffee that we're going to be trying very soon. So stay tuned for that. We'll be announcing that on a future episode.
Pop culture coffee hour.
Brought to you by Ancient Faith
Radio.com
/coffee.
/coffee. Hyphen.
Even more coffee.
Yeah.
Tim,
All right.
that's an
Shall we talk
unnecessarily
about the
long.
things?
That's an unnecessarily long URL. Yes, let's get into the things. Let's get into the things.
I feel like we're missing the point of URLs.
So what's the
V
thing?
equals sign 9892446.
Can I get your niner in there?
You call him from a walkie-talkie.
But what is the thing about which we will discourse on today's episode of Pop Culture Coffee Hour?
Today, we have set our sights on discussing the Yuletide classic,
Die Hard.
Matrix. Yeah, it's very cheery. A lot of it is done it has shades of green, so there is a very green element to it.
Yeah.
So
it's very carbon neutral. Yeah.
Quite Christmassy.
Yeah.
I would say.
So I think the reason why we wanted to talk about the Matrix is I think you've probably, over the last few episodes, we've had kind of like some themes running through our heads. Watching The Social Dilemma a couple of months ago has definitely I think continued to be sort of like in the back of our minds about just like social media and being plugged in and the way that it's changing us and the way that it's changing society. So it seemed very appropriate to talk about a film that broached a lot of these topics 21 years ago, actually.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. The 1999 classic, The Matrix. So
Yuletide classic.
Yuletide classic. Yes. Die Hard, The Matrix. That's the top 1 and 2 Yuletide classics of all time.
And then It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. That is the right order. But what we are doing is I think we're just doing the first Matrix movie. We're not doing the trilogy. We did not go back and rewatch the trilogy, which again is I think 2 and 3 are 1 is the sweet spot. So we're going to talk about the 1999 classic Matrix.
La Matrix. The La Matrix.
The L La Matrix.
The L La Matrixo.
But yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So
it'll be fun.
Should I start with a little
for those who have not ever seen it, which what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
But yeah, why don't you give us a little thing?
Yeah, it's 21 years old. We're not going to unleash the spoiler porg because this movie came out last century. So if you haven't watched it at this point, sorry, spoilers abound. So The Matrix
tell your porgs to stand by.
Yep, stand by and stand down. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Anyway, so there's a lone hacker named Neo, who's played by Keanu Reeves, who is asking these questions about the nature of reality, and he's contacted by a shadowy figure named Morpheus, who promises to answer the question that's been plaguing him for so long: what is the Matrix? Right? If you remember the marketing campaign for this too, there was all these posters. What is the Matrix? Right? They were kind of trying to create this level of mystery as the movie was coming out. So Morpheus kind of pulls the wool back from Neo's eyes, and it turns out that the Matrix is everything. The Matrix is this computer simulation that masquerades as reality. And so the movie, The Matrix, kind of takes place in the year 2199, although nobody knows exactly when, because sometime in the late 20th, early 21st century, humans create AI, war breaks out between machines and humans, and the machines end up enslaving people, and they turn human beings into batteries. So everybody is plugged in. Our bodies are kind of harvested for heat.
What kind of batteries?
Duramaxicell batteries.
Oh, they're not Duragizers?
Duragizers, sorry.
Okay.
Bong, bong, bong. Duragizers, that's right.
The Duragizer.
Pop Culture Coffee Hour, brought to you by Duragizer. So human beings have been enslaved. We're just kind of like batteries. And some human beings have been breaking out of the Matrix because there was this one human being who kind of was born and he was free and he's been helping people get out. There's the last human city of Zion deep underground. And so there's this war essentially between the robots and the people. and Morpheus thinks Neo is the chosen one. All sorts of stuff sort of happens, and it turns out that Neo is the chosen one. He dies, he comes back to life, he sees the Matrix for what it really is, and he begins to have powers over the Matrix because it is this computer simulation into which he finds himself. And at the end of the movie, he flies away because why not?
Flies off on his skateboard.
Yes, with his coattails flapping. But that is it. That's it. Did I?
Hot dog, roll it in a pizza, stuff it with some jack cheese.
You got cheesy blasters.
And then Meat Cat flies away on his skateboard.
Yes, so playing the role of Meat Cap is Neo, played by Keanu Reeves.
Yeah. This summer, Keanu Reeves is Meat Cat.
Did you enjoy Keanu Reeves' portrayal of Meat Cat? That's what I would like to know.
If so, Netflix recommends these shows for you. Anyway, so one thing that I think is really funny, by the way, is that like when we tried to record this on Wednesday, my internet didn't work at all. It was like it almost seemed like the Matrix itself was telling us not to do this. It was like the Matrix was down. There was a glitch. But yeah, this is a fantastic movie. It's been so long since I had watched it that I barely remembered it. And so I watched it actually again a couple months ago. And it felt, I mean, it probably had been close to 20 years actually since I had seen this movie. But it was like suddenly I felt like the movie was a completely different thing than I remembered it being about. You know, like it felt like I was like, oh, I think I get this movie a little bit more. And I had a moment even watching it where I felt like 2020 for me has sort of felt a lot like that moment where Neo wakes up in the pod and kind of like looks around and sees reality, like sees actual reality, and goes like, oh,
I don't like that.
Things are different than I thought that they were. And I
don't like this.
No, no, I don't feel so good. And it was kind of like a painful waking up this year for me. You know, there was been a lot of pain this year. And I resonate with that line when Morpheus says to Neo, or when Neo says, "Why do my eyes hurt?" And Morpheus says, "Because you've never used them before." Yeah. And like, I was just like, oh, dang, dang, dang. So yeah, it was really good to go back and watch it again. How did you feel going back and watching it again?
Yeah. Oh, I enjoyed it. I think this is a movie that totally holds up. It holds up visually, right? It doesn't feel like it's 20 years old. I mean, just it looks really good. The story still feels really engaging and fun and relevant. And, you know, this is a movie that's made, it came out in 1999. Like the internet it's funny because the internet was this new and exciting thing in the 90s, right? Like I remember, like Yahoo message boards and GeoCities websites and like AOL dial-up and all that, right? And this movie kind of like poses this dystopian question about the potential for us being plugged into this like imaginary world and what that means. And like, I don't know, I think it's very appropriate for us to revisit this in 2020 when, because of these lockdowns, because of the coronavirus, like we've been plugged into this artificial reality more than we normally do. I mean, like it's happened more over time, right? But like we've been super plugged in 2020 and it hasn't been good for us. So like, yeah, it hit home like, oh man, yeah, this is totally creating this false sense of reality and it's just tearing us apart.
Yeah. Well, can you say what you mean by like we've been plugged in more than ever?
Yeah. So I think like, you know, there's a couple of layers to this, right? One is we've simply had to connect with each other like through the medium of Zoom calls and FaceTimes and whatever, right? Like because physical distance has been a thing during the course of the pandemic in 2020, right? So we're just kind of spending more time in front of our screens. But it's not just like interpersonal reactions. I kind of feel like there have been, you know, the rise of like fake news and the rise of like all these sort of illusory things and cons, to be totally like blunt about it, right? That have been sucking people into like these wormholes of misinformation that have led us to just sort of like continue to disconnect between like what actually is and what we believe to be. And we're kind of like just in this weird situation where like we're not dealing with like the same facts, and we're just kind of like dwelling in like alternate realities. Like, your social, like we talked about this with the social dilemma, right? Like your media feed and my media feed is not the same thing. Like we're just kind of, we're existing in like parallel universes, and it's causing us to like lose our minds. So I don't know. This seems like a very appropriate 2020 movie.
Yes, truly. Because it's funny because, I think my experience has actually been, I feel like we've been maybe on the one hand, right, there is this kind of like plugging into like the social media aspect, because like that's where I think probably we spend a lot more of our time, probably not just in 2020, but in general. And I think now we have less stuff that keeps us like busy. So I think there's more time probably for people to be affected by stuff or like to do stuff. Because I also feel like this has actually been a strange year of like of unplugging from the matrix. Like with like I feel like the reason that even now kind of like Black Lives Matter stuff kind of even happened is to the extent that it did, because I feel like for a couple months people had nothing else really to do, and started paying more attention to like, oh wait, like there's some things that are happening in the world that we don't like, and this is like not a safe and good situation for a lot of people, so we need to go do something about it. So I sort of felt like, even for myself, like as I stepped back, like I said, I kind of felt like I woke up realizing like, oh, I've been a battery kind of like keeping like the machine running, is kind of how I've felt, and if I stop serving the system, then it's gonna like unplug me and just let me die. Which it's funny because the ironic thing is, it's like in the Matrix, right? The people theoretically need the system to keep them alive, but the system actually needs them to stay alive. So it's just I don't know. It's a weird thing, in which I don't know if I told you this story, but early on when I went to the store, I like spoke to one of the cashiers. She's kind of like an older lady. She might have been in like her 50s, and she was wearing like a mask, a face shield, gloves, just like decked out in stuff, right?
COVID regalia.
And so I just thanked her. I was like, thank you for being here, and doing this. Like, you guys are making it, we need you to be here. Like, you really are essential. And she was like, I know I'm getting paid $12 to risk my life out here. And I was like, that kind of for me was this moment of going like, oh, dang, like realizing that that the life of the woman was like, I mean, she was there and scared, but she needed to be there because like for her $12 an hour, like that's all, that she can do. But also at the same time, what's crazy is like if every, cashier or food worker or whatever decided, like, you know what, we don't make enough money to interface with the public on a regular basis. We're not going to do this. Not going to risk our lives. Like the machine would crumble. It would be chaos if people just stopped showing up at grocery stores. And like, what would we do?
Sure. That's true. There'd be lots of layers to that chaos. There'd be lots of layers to that chaos. Yeah, I think like the complicating factor though is there's a lot of people I think who feel like they have been unplugged, right? Like they've sort of red pilled and they've kind of been unplugged, right? And I think the difficult things becomes like dialoguing between that and navigating that, right? Because there are people who will say like, oh, 2020 is the year I discovered like the media was fake, or 2020 was the year I discovered like Q drops and Q prophecies and whatever, right? Like I think like we've all had these layers of like revelation, and the question is like, how do we engage in the midst of those and talk about them and kind of sort what is from what isn't. That's where it becomes complicated, because we're all having these aha moments, and they're leading us in very different directions.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So where do you feel like would be kind of like the best place to start this conversation then? Because like, you're bringing up the idea of red pilling and all of this kind of stuff, but I think you're also speaking to just like the idea of perception kind of being something that can be easily toyed with, right? And how and that's basically the whole premise of the Matrix, right? Is like, you everything has been, you're being shown exactly what we want you to see, right? So we can start wherever you want to start there.
Yeah, that's fair. I think like the nature of reality, how we sort of like see ourselves in relation to the world, and like just the maybe as an even sort of like more baseline matter, the difficulty sometimes of telling the difference between what is and what isn't, right? I mean, like the thing is, most of the people who are plugged into the Matrix, right, have no sense that they're actually plugged into something artificial. They spend their entire lives in reality, like they're like trapped in these weird, grotesque red pods. Their body heat is being harvested for energy, and like every interaction that they have, every sort of sensation that they have is just kind of like electrical signals that are being pumped into their brain, because their consciousnesses are being interfaced with this like artificial reality. And nobody can tell, right? Like there are some people who have this kind of like something is wrong, right? Like when it starts with Neo, like there's this kind of gut level, something doesn't quite work. And that becomes like the impetus for him, actually unplugging. But then on the other hand, you have somebody like Cypher, who experiences reality and knows that human beings are enslaved. But then he actually like sells out his friends because he prefers the comfort and the illusion, because like the illusion is more comfortable than the difficulty of reality, right? So it's like, I think there's all these layers to it, like telling the difference between what is real and what is not, and like caring about what is real versus what is not, right? Because like Cypher knows the difference between truth and reality, but he doesn't care. He'd rather have the fake sensation of a juicy steak than the reality of the goopy porridge that he has to eat every day, right? And I think like that there's interesting like layers to that too, because I think like when it comes to our own spiritual lives, one of our dangers is comfort, right? One of our dangers is sort of like ego and pride and things that reinforce the way that we see ourselves and the way that we see the world, right? Because we'd rather have like sometimes we'd rather have the comfort of illusions versus like the harsh reality of truth, that things need to be fixed, right? That I need to repent. Like I think we sometimes sort of like default to the easy thing, the fake juiciness of a fake steak versus the reality of like, oh, humanity is enslaved and we need to do something about it, and we're going to sacrifice a lot to do it.
Right. I think like the kind of like the bottom line, especially like I think in the Matrix, like what the movie begins to expose is the reality that we're a part of a system that exploits human energy, right? Like it exploits human capacity, exploits human creativity, it's just exploitative, to the point of, it just really does consume them. Isn't there times like where you see like machines eating some of the pods? If I remember that correctly.
No, I think they're like moving them around and plugging them in. Because what happens to the dead, as Morpheus says, is the dead are liquefied and fed intravenously to the living.
Oh, yeah. That's the thing that's like
gross,
totally horrifying.
Yeah. The machines like leech off their energy. Like they use the body heat is converted to energy, and that's what the machines run on.
Yeah, and they feed human beings back to human beings. So all like human beings are living on the blood and guts of other human beings. Yeah, that's disgusting.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, right, is that's like Cypher prefers that, right? Like
Yeah.
he wants to go back into a system that is clearly exploitative, that he knows is exploitative and destructive, because he feels it benefits him.
Yeah. Because what does he ask
in some
for?
way.
Right.
I don't remember. I don't remember.
He's having that conversation. Well, he doesn't want to remember, first of all. He wants like willful ignorance to what is real.
Yeah.
But he's sitting there in like, in the fancy restaurant with Agent Smith eating the steak. And he says, I want to be rich. I want to be somebody important, like an actor. Right. And he is totally willing to sell out his friends, and he's totally willing to close his eye to the exploitation of others, as long as he has a soft landing.
Yeah. Yeah. And to kill them in real life too,
Yeah.
which is like, yeah. I mean, it's a lot. There's a lot to be unpacked, I think, for sure. But what I feel like is, the most helpful kind of place to like where I feel like this movie opened my eyes is kind of like is looking at, again, how systems have been designed to like take from us, to benefit the machines, to benefit really like the people at play. And unless one of the things I thought was interesting too is that, every person in the Matrix is potentially an agent of the system.
Yeah.
And therefore an enemy, right? Like, or must be kind of like not necessarily actively an enemy, but like you kind of gotta like potentially an enemy, right? Yeah. And what's been interesting, I think, in having some of these some conversations that I've had with some of my like family members and friends and all of this kind of stuff, as I've questioned like some of the kind of like the structures of the economy and things like this, and like how it seems to me that it's constructed in a way that it really only benefits a few, and that seems really difficult to me, like a difficult pill to swallow, so to speak. Those who also do not benefit from the system become ardent defenders of it. And like, I'm like, why do you care? Why is it so important to you that, Jeff Bezos gets to be the first trillionaire? Like, why is that like the most important thing to you right now?
Yeah.
But like, no. Like, we have to like, we can't say anything bad about these billionaire, trillionaire heroes of American capitalism. Like, we can't do that, because why? Like if you say it's weird to me that like if someone points out like, here's some of the unethical practices of like XYZ corporation, and they're like, well, they provide a lot of jobs. You're like, okay. And like I don't know what that like,
yeah.
Okay, so we can deal with the exploitation and like bad working conditions and the unethical practice. That's fine, as long as they're giving people $7.75 an hour. Then we're like, it's fine.
Well, that's the complicated thing, right? Because like a lot of times these big companies, right, are only able to get to the level where they get to because of the advantage we give them, right? Like the reason that, like, let's be blunt, right? The reason that Amazon and Walmart and these other big companies are actually are able to get away with paying people as little as they can is because they're able to depend on like public assistance, right? It's a weird sort of system where like tax money goes to like actually subsidize these big companies, right? So like we have this myth sometimes of like free market enterprise. Again, anarcho-capitalist, like super right-wing when it comes to these things, right? It grinds my gears. It totally grinds my gears. We have this myth that we're living in this like free market sort of world, but we're actually kind of like people are allowed to double dip. Like most small businesses don't get that level of like, well, you're allowed to sort of like squeeze your workers because they're going to sort of depend in this sort of way, right? Like tax breaks and whatever that kind of are just kind of like focused. And that's the funny thing. But the funny thing is though, like, I think like when you actually begin to get into it, like people on both sides like are upset at the system. That's really the funny thing, right? I think sometimes it's the way we have these conversations. Because sometimes the framing of the conversation gets people to be defensive, right? Because it's kind of like because on the one hand, we don't want, people are sometimes afraid of change, and people are afraid of like the comforts and the advantages that we have being like upended. But when it comes down to it, like there's a lot of people who are just like deeply frustrated, which is the other thing too, right? And how do you square that needle between having like a real conversation about like, okay, what's actually wrong with the world, and also like pushing into it and being like, okay, what can we do as human beings to like make something that is more equitable or more less unfair? I don't know.
Yeah, totally. I think like the hard thing is, and I think this is where, the Matrix is, I think, pretty profound, is that like, I think kind of intuitively for those of us who don't want to do that, I think it's because we do sort of maybe tacitly see that like whatever this is right now benefits us.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have a nice house, like I'm doing fine with my family, and all of that. Like, we live in a nice neighborhood, and it's by no means like fancy or anything like that, but it's quiet and it's safe and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm pretty happy out here, and I don't have to worry about like, drug addicts breaking into my home, because it's like, don't have to worry about that, or, walking outside and maybe getting shot and all of that kind of stuff. So like, I think there's a part of it that's like, well, I don't really want to shake things up too much, because
I got
like,
it good.
I've got it good. So I'm kind of okay, like this being built on the backs of people that maybe are not doing great, And so if it means that I have to like, kind of burn incense to Jeff Bezos, maybe I will do that a little bit.
And that's the challenging thing about like Cypher, who wants to just forget.
Yes.
Right. It's kind of the willful ignorance sometimes. This was something that I think The Good Place did that was interesting. Right. No spoilers, because it's not a Good Place episode, but they talk about the ways that like racking up good points gets harder over time. Right. Because like, oh, you ate these tomatoes that were harvested by like an exploited migrant worker. Like that was not a good thing. Or you bought this like, cheap pair of pants that were like this fast fashion thing made by exploited child labor over the seas. Like that's negative points, right? There are all these consequences to the very simple choices that we make on a daily basis. And yeah, it's exhausting to like think through the implications of all of that, right? But I mean, on the one hand, like, but like, if we took the Christian call seriously, to put out like the life of our brother is really our life, right? And to kind of like think, okay, am I actually like, is my comfort at the expense of somebody else? I think that would change the game a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be that way, but we have built a system where that seems to be the case if we really dig into it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think we end up again sort of feeling like it's the like the thing that we prefer. I think sometimes I think about like when I was going to school and going to grad school and all of this kind of stuff, and like I took out student loans like many people, and now I am just like swimming in debt, like just tons and tons of debt. And it's a great kind of like irony, right? Because the reason that like I was told like take out all this debt, it'll give you a great future and you'll have da 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 da, and you'll be able to, fill in the blank, get great jobs and da 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 da. But now like I'm in the hole, and I'm like so I have to be kind of plugged in, and I have to keep working a lot to pay off this thing that theoretically was the thing that made me allowed me to get this job, so that I can pay off the thing,
which is not super lucrative.
Which is not super lucrative. It's
also
not super
too
lucrative. Yeah, it's not super lucrative. So it's like,
welcome to working for the church, but not just the church, right?
Yeah. But the thing is, I think like if I had thought differently and been like, wait a minute, like I could not do any of that, and not be beholden to anybody, and get a kind of like I don't know, like go do something else if I wanted to, and figure out how to like be free or whatever. But like,
Yeah.
we've chosen, or I've chosen what I've chosen, and you know, I'm grateful for the life that I have. I'm not complaining about it, but like, I do think that it's really interesting that, you know, the story that I was sold was of like, basically like, sell yourself into slavery and like, you'll be glad.
Yeah.
Right. Because like, now I can't just like, I can't not work off my debt. Like, I have a debt to work off,
Yeah.
and I will do that till forever.
Yeah. Hooray.
Because that's the American freedom.
It's
You know?
funny, right? Like, so there's a phrase called golden handcuffs, which I heard the phrase golden handcuffs the first time when I was in law school. So for those who don't know, like, I was a lawyer before I went to seminary, right? And I remember very vividly, I don't know if I've told this story before. So it was interview time. We were getting ready to like have interviews with firms that were hiring us, right? You know, to work as attorneys and all that. And I sit down for this one guy from a big New York firm, and the first question out of his mouth is like, "Are you sure you want to be a lawyer?" And I thought, like, okay, maybe he's testing me, right? He's kind of like, you know, approaching this interview from a different angle. And I'm like, well, I'm very excited. Like, I think the law is super interesting and so forth. And he's like, no, you don't
You're like, I
understand,
think
man.
my biggest problem is that I work too hard.
Yes, my only downside is that I have no downside. But he stops me, right, as I'm trying to, like, you know, frame this in terms of productivity and like my love for the law and all that. He's like, no, you don't understand. I wake up every morning in a, you know, a really nice apartment in Midtown Manhattan, and I'm paying like ridiculous amounts on rent, and I'm paying like ridiculous amounts on this like really nice car that I lease, and so forth and so on. And I have all of these nice things, and I hate my job. And I could leave and do something else, but then I couldn't afford all of these nice things, which don't really make me that happy, but they're nice things. And so he's like, literally, my half-hour interview with him is him lamenting how terrible and meaningless his life is. And it turns out he had that conversation with everybody. But it's
like,
golden handcuffs, right? It's like, only way you can afford your lifestyle is by selling yourself into slavery, into this thing of like,
yes,
working for a firm you don't really like, doing a job you don't really like, but then you get this stuff and you realize the stuff doesn't make you that happy. And I thought for a long time that golden handcuffs was just this thing that like characterizes professionals, right? Like lawyers who make a lot of money but hate their jobs, or doctors who make a lot of money who hate their jobs. But like, in the grand scheme of things, like Americans, you know, like first world countries, like we're very affluent in the grand scheme of things. You know, we turn knobs and clean water comes out of our knobs, right? We press buttons and cold air comes out of the wall, right? Like we have nice stuff. But we also like pay a heavy price for it sometimes. Like we all kind of have this weird golden handcuffs where we're willingly playing into this. And it's also like the deck is stacked against us because we're not really happy and we wish there was a different way, but there is no different way that we can see. Like, it's just weird, the level of malaise that exists out there.
yeah, and I think because we spend so much time and energy being plugged into a system that keeps us alive and that we keep alive, you know, like it doesn't actually construct a really meaningful world for us.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like about, you know, making ends meet most of the time, and that's a pretty exhausting existence.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like being a battery, and that's like, you know, like I think why a lot of us use words like drained, and empty, and like that kind of stuff, because there is this kind of like, I have to like feed myself to this machine, you
Yeah.
know, that keeps me alive, at least in some sort of version of life, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's hard, and I think it does call to question kind of like in a big way, like what is really, what does it mean to be human at all, right? Like, is it really a human existence just to be plugged into a machine to keep it alive and to have it keep you alive?
Yeah.
And that feels like it's not, you know.
Yeah.
Human existence in the Matrix is a little messier than that, but it's, you know, beautiful because Zion's underneath, right? Like like if we could open our eyes and go see where like real movement and creativity and relationship and joy kind of are.
Yeah.
That's leaning into the second one a little bit, but
Yeah. It's interesting because as you say this, right, the thing that kind of comes to mind, or the image that comes to mind, is the prodigal son spending, we don't really know how long, just eating the pods of the pigs, and realizing that it's gross and it's not filling him, but also kind of feeling like he's stuck and has nowhere to go. And the thing about like, that spiritual parable is like, eventually he's able to go back to his father's house. Right. And when it comes to escape from sin, like hopefully we hit rock bottom at some point and we have this moment of repentance. We turn back to God out of our sort of like sin and our spiritual addictions and whatever it is. But when it comes to kind of like this like social, cultural, economic malaise, for so many people, like it feels like there is nowhere to go. Right. And we've talked about this before, right? What if the church was the sort of place that offered people like liberation from something like that? That the church was not simply a place where people could go when they wanted to sort of put the sinful pods away, but the church was some place that was like a refuge to just get away from this rat race that is grinding people's like spirits down.
Yeah.
I think the first time we began thinking about this was like the Benedict option episode, possibly, that we did years ago, right? Like what if the church pooled our resources and like we built housing for people? So people could like live in Christian community and not have to like mortgage themselves to the hilt for the sake of like having, right? What if the church was able to like pool resources and get people out of debt? What if the church was able to, which is what the church does in Acts, right? Like the church is, when you want to leave these pods, the pods of the pigs, but it feels like we don't have that. I don't know.
Yeah. And I agree. I think that there's something to be said of like, the whole point is to get you out of the system, like that's what Jesus does, right? In the world, not of the world. So he pulls us, like he red pills us out. like that's I think the general thing there. But like, it's interesting because I feel kind of like, sometimes that the church almost kind of like sanctifies the system sometimes, like you go and like you work your job and you do it's like kind of like go be a Christian at work and go, make money and make sure you give it to the church. And like, there's kind of like this, it's like the same, almost it feels sometimes similar, like a similar kind of language, and like, make sure you like give your time here. And, it's about like, what can you give to the church? Right. Like, I feel like that is a lot of kind of like, the language that I hear often in churches, right? Like, stewardship has to do with what you give. Not with what the church has been given and does. Right. Like, often I think like, I'm not saying that's always the case.
No.
And I certainly don't mean to paint in broad strokes, but the general impression that I get is that is usually what people are meaning when they start talking about stewardship, is like, what have you filled out your pledge card? Have you, plugged into this particular pod? So I mean, I think it would be vastly different if we could see like, how does the church actually take seriously the idea that you can't have two masters, right? You can't be both plugged into the matrix and plugged into the body of Christ. Like, it can't be both. It's one or the other. Because man, it's hard. Like the reality is like, housing costs are skyrocketing, healthcare costs are skyrocketing, education costs are skyrocketing. And it's sad and somewhat bizarre that that's the case. I think I've dropped this statistic before, but there are 17 million vacant homes in America, and and less than 1 million homeless people. Which is like, it's a very strange number kind of to like hold that all in perspective, right? That means that I think the math I did was that pretty much like every person experiencing homelessness in America could live in a different place like every day of the month. Like if you could
Yeah.
give each person 31 homes and they could
It's an
just,
imbalance. It's a super imbalance.
yeah. Meanwhile, people are struggling to figure out how they're going to pay rent, which is like, what? Like it doesn't make any sense that there would be this hyper availability. Not to mention, that like there's these thinkers like this guy named Rutger Bregman, who I really enjoy. He wrote a book called Utopia for Realists, which is a fascinating book. And Andrew Yang wrote a book called The War on Normal People. And in both of these books, basically, they kind of allude to the fact that like, the advances in technology and kind of like all of this stuff that we've done now, where we are, like we live in the land of plenty, and like machines are going to be able to do most people's jobs.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be like a move in the future where it's like there's just not going to be the amount of like work necessary for people to have, and really like that they don't really need to do it, because like everything will be done, which is on the one hand to me kind of an exciting prospect, because it's like, well, now we can just kind of let things be automated and people could just go about having human lives. Like they can write music and do art and they can play with their kids and they can like that's what we could be doing with that. But it's like, that's not what's going to happen. Like we're going to have to find new ways to like put more money into the system. Like that's just how it's going to play out, because that's how the machine runs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like what we've seen is what happens when that isn't how it plays out. And I think that's kind of what's happened through some of 2020. People are like, wait a minute, they're seeing things as, like you said, like these aha moments. Everyone's having different aha moments, but I think it's partly why people are so mad.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Because there is a sense of disenfranchisement.
Yeah. Everyone
right?
feels played.
Yeah. Yeah. You have, like millennials who did what they were supposed to and went to the schools and took out the debt to go to the schools to get the jobs, are now realizing that their jobs don't pay enough to like pay off all that debt. Right.
Yeah.
And, people who have followed the rules and had their businesses are now seeing like businesses shut down because like the economy is crumbling for a lot of people. Right. And like, I was like reading this thing or listening, I forget where it was, right? Even a lot of the opposition sometimes like people feel to like wearing masks, right? Which is just kind of like a manifestation of this rage sometimes. Like for some people, it's just like the government has failed me. Why am I going to like put this mask on when they tell me to wear a mask, right? There's just kind of like all these layers of anger, like rage and anger. And the thing about feelings is like they're all valid, like they're all coming from something. Even if the information that is like leading us to have these feelings, like, okay, potentially there's some misinformation here and there, or whatever it is, but like the fact that society seems to be seething is not a good thing. It's not a good thing, because whatever we're a part of, people are feeling very disenfranchised by the whole thing. And like it doesn't seem like we're really like addressing it or talking about it, because even when it comes to politics, right? Like a thing that I've been thinking about recently is because like people on the left and the right, like it's just impossible for us to talk to each other, and maybe we disagree about solutions, right? But like what if every person took the concerns of other people seriously, right? Even if you disagree about the fix, right? Even if you disagree about, oh, the left is out there trying to do this and the right is out there trying to do this, like what if we all at least had enough empathy to like think about what is causing people pain, to at least like hear each other, hear the ways that like the system has sort of failed us, and then we can maybe come to some sort of consensus about what to do with it. But like I feel like we're not even listening to the pain that other people are bringing to the table, because we're so plugged into our like little echo chambers, so when people on the left like say, hey, legitimately, like here's this thing, people on the right are like, nope, not interested. And when people on the right are legitimately like, hey, this thing is broken, people on the left are like, nope, not interested. Maybe we don't agree on solutions, but maybe we could at least like listen to each other's pain. I feel like even that could potentially build some level of like unplugging, right? If we actually like got out of our echo chambers and just listened, just listened. I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting because like the pain component, right? I feel like it's something that is largely missed and rather kind of gets like sublimated into anger, right? Like that's I think one of the harder things is like you just have people yelling at each other, as opposed to like what you're saying, that we kind of skip over that and go full Kylo Ren on the
more.
Wanting to burn it all, kill the past. Let the past die. That's what he says. It's time for old things to end. Snoke, Skywalker, the Sith, the Jedi.
Hi, my name's Matt.
I'm a radar technician.
Anyway, a little tangent. But yeah, right?
Kylo Ren looks like he weighs about 90 pounds soaking wet under that black little dress.
Kylo Ren is shredded. I heard he's shredded.
I haven't had my muffin yet, Matt.
I am wearing a Star Wars shirt. Speaking of all that.
Nice.
But yeah, because like we're so burning with rage that we're letting the rage be this thing that like we're interacting on the level of rage rather than trying to interact on a more human level.
Yeah. Which like it's just hard, man. It's hard because I feel like a lot of the conversations that I have come back to like one person saying the system is exploitative and someone else saying no, it's not.
Yeah.
like that to me is it's like, well, there's no way to have, like, you know what I mean? Like, even if we were to find a way of talking about pain, like there's some presuppositions I think that are already taken into account that like prevent that almost from happening too, like just key ways of seeing the world and how it's organized. Like I'm just trying to imagine like how some of that could play out. And it almost feels to me sometimes like there's, it's just like, there's no way, like not, at least not across sides of a thing. But I think like within Christ, like that's far more possible because we have to be freed from the thing, right? Like, I think that's partly what I'm trying to say is it's like, we can't actually have a conversation about the Matrix unless we're all out of it for real. Right. Like, because otherwise someone becomes potentially an agent of the Matrix on either side. Right. Like whatever, I don't know which one is which or whatever, but like, unless we're freed from it and kind of set free from it in Christ, then like we can't actually take a look at the thing, call it what it is, and make changes that need to be done or augment it or somehow see what is wrong with it and what is broken with it, because it's the thing that's giving us a life otherwise. But if it doesn't give us life, if Christ is the one giving us life for real, then like, who cares what we do to the Matrix? Burn the whole thing down. I don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Like, it actually doesn't matter. Let's start over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
It does. Right. And that's where I have hope, because I feel like everybody kind of realizes that on some level, right? Like, people on the left realize like the system is not working for people. And people on the right also realize that the system is not working for people. The question is like, how do we sort of like square that circle and both get to kind of a fundamental point where we can just kind of like share our lament, because like you think of the slogans on each side, right? The right is kind of like drain the swamp, right? Like there's this sense that the system is not working for people. There's corruption, there's whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And people on the left are like, yes, it's corporatist, it's this and that, which is exploiting people. Like, it's the same kind of thing. That's my sense anyway. Like, for the mass of people on the ground, like maybe there's, again, we have different causes that we attribute it to it, right? And we certainly have different solutions. But I think there's a level of rage and frustration that's pretty nonpartisan. The question is how to square that circle, right? How to like have a conversation, and maybe that's where like we have to kind of like step back from solutions for a second, because like when the left presents the solution, the right is going to sort of be like, nope, I'm loyal to this kind of view of the establishment. And if the right presents a solution, the left is going to be like, nope, I'm loyal to this view of society, right? As opposed to like, okay, we're not saying anything proactive right now. How can we like even like unplug from our own opinions, right? Unplug from our own solutions, and just on a human level, just like listen, because you're upset, I'm upset, you're disenfranchised, I'm disenfranchised, you're probably hurting economically, I'm hurting economically, like whatever it is, like, I don't know. I have hope that that's possible, because I feel like we're all so upset. We can come together over that upsetness and just be like, yeah, man, things are rough right now.
Yeah. I think that is huge. Like if there at least can be some level of like, we all agree that this whatever this is not working.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
some level of that, then maybe there can be, movement forward. But
yeah.
I mean, it's definitely like an interesting take on a lot of things, this movie. I feel like we've kind of like talked a lot about this thing. So it's maybe we should move on to something else. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Just with our remaining time, so we're not just spending the whole time talking about the system. One of the things
system is down.
Indeed it is. One of the things that I thought was an interesting point that you kind of wanted to bring up was this idea of like free will versus prophecy, kind of like the big thing throughout the film, right? Having to do with like, what basically, are we really free, right? Are we really free to choose for what we do with our lives? Because like the reality is, in the Matrix, no one is free. Like the system chooses for them, right? And then you get this character of the Oracle who comes in, and when Neo first meets her, she's like, oh, and don't worry about the vase, and he like was like, what vase? And then he knocks it over, and she's like, that vase. And he's like, you really want to a mind bender, like, would you still have broken it if I hadn't said anything?
Yeah.
And you're like, and then Rage Against the Machine starts playing in the background, and that's
come on
when he flies away. So I think there is something that's really fascinating, because like do we have this choice? Like, she tells him that he's not the one, right? But then he kind of ends up proving to himself that there is, right? The trick is to realize there is no spoon, right?
Yeah.
And he kind of does, because he sees that there is no Matrix, therefore he can't die in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like he can't, because it's not real.
It's not real.
So, and he sees it. He's able to see that it's just a series of generated numbers and things like this.
Yeah.
That's why he can dominate them and control them.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm curious, kind of like what your take on some of that is.
Yeah, totally. I think what it does is it really challenges, I think, what freedom is, right? Because I think like one of the interesting things is, as human beings, like theologically, we kind of live in this tension between we're free and we're not at the same time. I think sometimes when we have conversations about free will, sometimes it's framed in this very sort of binary way. Like, either there's predestination and there is no God, and the world is purely a physical reality that was set at the Big Bang, or we have total freedom. But in a theological sense, like, our freedom is very limited and conditional. Like, there is one who is free, right? And it is God, who is totally above necessity. Like, I am not free to disregard the laws of gravity. I am not free in a particular situation to will myself into another situation, right? Like, if I have like a tough situation today in 2020, I can't will myself into a more simple situation in 2004 or the year 4 or whatever it is, right? Like, I'm kind of limited by space and time.
I can't even touch my toes.
No matter how much you want to will yourself out of it, right?
My hamstrings are too tight.
Yeah, like, we're given a certain body, we're given a certain sort of like historical reality, right? We live now, not at a different time. We live as as males or females with particular bodies in particular places with particular families, right? There's a lot of just givenness about our life, and what I think what freedom is like, freedom is sort of like working within those situations. And if anything, what we as Christians do, right, is kind of like grow into our freedom. Because freedom is not like, freedom is not being able to do whatever the heck you want, right? Which I think is like sometimes when we have this conversation about like freedom versus prophecy, like freedom is you get to choose whatever you want. Like freedom is really like freedom from sin and death, you know, in the way that Christians will sort of like frame this. It's not the freedom to sin, it's freedom from sin. And sometimes like, and that kind of like that means working within the limitations that we have. And sometimes like what ministry is, right, is like giving people what they need in a particular situation to allow them to grow, which is I think what like the oracle does, right? The oracle actually kind of like will tell Neo that he's not the one, because that's what he needs to hear in order to kind of like grow and prosper. And sometimes like what is going to be helpful for us are going to be things that are going to help us to sort of grow and prosper, to reach a situation where we can like tell the difference between illusory temptations and reality, right? Not to allegorize it too much, right? Yeah. But I think there's something about kind of like, realizing like, I don't need to be a slave to my passion for food. I see it as just kind of green ones and zeros. Like I don't need to be a slave to my passion for revenge. It's just all ones and zeros that I can sort of like remove myself from. Right.
Yeah.
Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. I wonder too, right? Like if kind of again, like with the ability to see things for what they are, like if this is part of kind of the way that it goes for Neo, because I mean, last time we talked, was it last time we did Bill and Ted? Or was that a couple times?
Yes. Yeah, that was last time.
So doubling down on Keanu. But in that one we kind of talked about like, again, this kind of idea of prophecy, but from a different perspective, right? That like Bill and Ted are given this prophecy of like, you are the chosen ones.
Yeah.
And they end up not being, right? So it's kind of this opposite movement of the narrative for Keanu. In this one, he's told he's not the one, but then he becomes the one. So I wondered too, like if there's a part of it, like when Bill and Ted are given this idea, they're like, well, it's like they clearly weren't like lazy. They were trying to write the song, right? But I think they just kind of like expected that they would stumble on it, sort of kind of fulfill the prophecy.
Yeah.
And then eventually they just try to steal it from themselves, right?
Yeah.
Instead of actually doing the work of doing it. But they get kind of hell bent on the mission itself, right? Like the mission itself kind of becomes like the thing. So they forego their responsibility and kind of just like focus on the prophecy and the mission. Does that make sense? Like
yes, it's a very narrow
their mission
view.
is to write the song, or like that's what they're going to do, but they don't want to write it. In the movie they want to steal it.
Yeah.
For Neo, however, like I wonder if he had been told like you're the one, and he had this narrative of like you're the one who's going to bring down the Matrix, if that would have been kind of like gone to his head in some ways, like I'm the one who's going to bring down the Matrix. And then so what you get like is Morpheus being captured, right? And Neo doesn't have anything to lose at that point, right? Like I'm not the one, so like let's go get Morpheus.
Yeah.
If he had thought he was the one, he might have been like, no, Morpheus wouldn't want us to go after him. Like we have to stick to the mission. I have to
survive.
I have to survive. Yeah, I have to survive so that I can bring down the Matrix. So if he had that idea in mind, then like maybe he would have just sacrificed Morpheus to the mission. When in reality, love and sacrifice and Morpheus are the mission, right? Yeah. Like that is the way that we kind of begin to see the Matrix for what it is this machine and this system that keeps us apart from one another. But like sacrifice and love and seeing reality actually is like, that's what human existence is really about. Like he and Morpheus and Trinity have this relationship outside of the Matrix, right? That is worth fighting for and worth preserving and worth keeping him alive for. And so he's willing to go in there and risk everything for the sake of real life, right? For the sake of true life, as opposed to just trying to destroy the Matrix. So I wonder if it's kind of like in that way that not having this burden of being told that he's the one, he's free to actually become the one. Right? Through love and sacrifice. Does that make any sense?
It totally does. It totally does. The way that sometimes we can have a myopia about like what we actually like need to do, right? Like the word you use was sort of like, narrow and sort of expansive, right? Because like, Neo is free to see that Morpheus is the mission rather than the mission is this narrow sense, right? Like even in Bill and Ted, it turns out the mission is not simply to write the song. The mission is actually to like get everybody in existence to play the song together. Right? It's a much larger vision of what the mission is.
To unite humanity through time and space, and parentheses, and to save reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that new? Yeah.
It's new. Yeah.
That was one of my favorite parts of the movie. And to save reality. Is that new? Yeah. Them saying things together is just the best.
It was a fun movie. It was a very fun movie.
Yes, it was.
But in the same way, right? Like the mission was actually bigger than just the chosen one surviving. The mission is like taking the Matrix down. The mission is freeing humanity. And what actually needs to happen, the chosen one needs to be ready to die to make that happen. Like Morpheus's piece of this is being willing to sacrifice his life for the one, right? At least that's kind of like his understanding. But in order to actually be the one, Neo has to be willing to lay down his life as well. He can't be like, well, strategically, I'm more important to the mission, right? The mission is actually about me. Like, no, the mission is about the liberation of humanity from this oppressive like illusion, right? And I think there's lots of like interesting Christological sort of stuff there, right? Because like it's that bit from Philippians, right? Like Christ didn't have his position at the right hand of the Father something to be grasped. Like he gave everything for the sake of us, so that humanity could be liberated and join him at the right hand of the Father, like join him in the interior life of the Trinity. There's I can't remember who said this, but there's like a relatively contemporaneous church father, I think, who said something along the lines of, and I can't remember the source, like true holiness is, maybe I'm paraphrasing, is willing to give you my seat in God's kingdom. Right? Like true salvation is being willing to be like, I'm on the inside, like I made it to the kingdom, but I'm willing to like leave and give you my seat at the table. That's what true like holiness and true salvation is. Right? And that kind of like, that totally breaks our understanding sometimes, because it's like this very narrow thing, this individual thing, right? Like Neo only has to be the one that survives, or like,
right,
I only have to sort of like be squared with God and sort of like make my way into the kingdom, right? But the real mission is just so much bigger.
Yeah. It's a church, a body.
Yeah.
It's
with cosmic significance.
Yeah. I think it ultimately, I feel like it has to be the thing that like, because I still don't really quite understand like how it is that Neo doesn't die entirely, but I think it has to be because he's like, wait a minute, this is just a machine.
Yeah.
Like his mind is able to actually accept full reality somehow.
Yeah. It's just a video game.
Yeah. I didn't die. I'm not dead yet.
I got better.
But yeah, I mean, this movie, right? Like, is there's so much in it. I feel like we could do like a 3-parter on it.
Much like the Matrix is a 3-parter.
Yes, except the other ones are not as great. So I don't know, man.
Yeah, we're an hour and a half in. Like we could theoretically keep going, but I don't know.
Yeah. Are there any final points kind of that you feel like maybe we need to touch on? I feel like we didn't do this justice.
Yes. I don't know. I think there is the one thing I think that's interesting is like, again, this goes back to the thing that we talked about at the very beginning. The Matrix is about this like removal of ourselves from this illusion, right? And I think one of the challenges for us is like actually being able to tell the difference between truth and illusion, right? Like even like this phrase "red pill" has become kind of like a thing online, right? And sometimes like the truth that we think we are finding is actually just kind of like a different kind of illusion and a different kind of disinformation. And I think there has to be kind of like a level of measuredness and humility when it comes to this, right? Like we're not I don't know. Like, I think it's just like, it's a hard thing because we're all talking from our own perspectives. We're all kind of like saying that we figured it out. But it's not a solo thing. I just feel like there's a level of like measuredness and wisdom that has to be at play in all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to me, like that honestly is why, like the way, I think if there was going to be one way that I would say like what should be our measure of truth as Christians is always looking to see how other people are afflicted.
Yes.
Right. Like if because otherwise we can be the victim of anything. Like I could be the victim of anything. Give me a second. Right. Like, my internet is so slow today. Like, right. Like, but as opposed to like, if we heard somebody else say that, we would be like, stop being such a baby. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's like people really have real problems going on. But when they happen to us, we're like,
yeah.
But I think if we could, if we really, I think truly want our eyes to be opened, and what the Matrix says is like human beings are exploited, right? Like, it seems to me that what is going to be kind of the filter for our truth is to ask for those to have those eyes, right? That Jesus says, like, yes. I am the poor, I am the hungry, I am the thirsty, I am the naked, I am those people, and you like to look for those people, and to see how others are exploited and how others are afflicted. Like, yes. I think that because you can't have a self-serving bias with that.
No.
Does that make sense?
No. Yes. And this is Saint Silouan, right? Like Saint Silouan says at one point that one of the signs of the presence of the Holy Spirit in your life is that your heart is big enough to encompass not just your neighbor, but the entire world.
Yeah.
Right. And this honestly is like, again, I've said this before, I'm very like libertarian leaning in my political philosophy, right? One of the things that really grinds my gears is that sometimes people who identify as sort of libertarian will be like, oh, the government doesn't get to tread on me, but other people need to comply. There's this weird sort of like double standard, right? Yeah. Right? That we sometimes have because our heart actually isn't big enough to encompass our neighbor. And we're willing to make excuses when force is used against somebody else. We're willing to make excuses when somebody else is like suffering under grinding poverty or whatever it is. Right? This takes us full circle to where we started, right? Like, as long as I'm okay, it's fine. And I'm willing to use a double standard when it comes to my neighbor. Mm-hmm. But like, if the heart is actually full of the grace of the Spirit, my heart is going to be big enough to encompass my neighbor. And even the blade of grass, right? Like Saint Silouan, as he's walking along the path, like his disciple, Elder Sophrony, hits the blade of grass out of the way. And like Saint Silouan is grieved that Elder Sophrony struck a blade of grass. Like, that's a heart. Yeah. That is a heart that is wide enough to encompass like love for all creation. And I think that's kind of a measure of all things. Like, is our heart callous towards our neighbor? Do we see our neighbor as the enemy? Is our heart indifferent to the suffering of our neighbor? Which is why I think it would be really helpful for us to kind of like start from a posture of just like listening to the pain of others.
Yeah.
Can I welcome the pain of my neighbor into my heart and be like, you know what? Tell me about what you're afraid of. Tell me about like what you're suffering with right now. Like, forget the solutions right now, but just like, can I make my heart open enough to co-suffer with you? And I think too often we don't do that. There's no room for the suffer. Like, good. The posture of like suffering towards our neighbor is good. The lefties got what they had coming to them. The righties got what they had coming to them. My neighbor that I hate got what's coming to him, as opposed to like, my brother is my life.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting point, right? And I think that like, yeah, you definitely can see that with like both sides of it for sure. Of like make libs cry, right? Like, whatever, make liberals cry again, whatever. I saw a bumper sticker that said that the other day. And then I also remember seeing just like Trump got COVID. Like it's just it happens on both sides where we like, do we take this kind of, it's like Schadenfreude, right? Like this pleasure in the misfortune of others.
Yes,
but it's mostly those that we don't agree with or don't like. Which is something to be said, instead of being able to be like, oh, I grieve that any human being,
Yeah.
is afflicted by anything. Like that's just sad that that's the reality.
Yeah. And this goes to that point
life.
that you realize, right? Like when we're plugged into the matrix, that's when we see other human beings as enemies or potential enemies.
Yeah.
Like to the extent that we do that about our political opponents or about whatever, some undesirable class of people, like that is a sign that we are plugged in, not to the grace of the Holy Spirit, but we are plugged into something else, some sort of cultural, sociological, political illusion, right? Whatever our particular matrix might be. It might be left-wing ideology, right-wing ideology, Americanism, anti-Americanism, right? Whatever it might be. Like if we see, if there is something in our hearts that sees other people as the enemy, like we're plugged into something that is not the grace of the Holy Spirit, whatever our particular matrix might be, because our heart is not big enough to actually like contain the entire. We're not Saint Silouans. We're not little Christs. We're just whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard lesson for us, I think, like if we could just be moved out from ourselves, like we have to come out of our pods and see that other people are enslaved, by name it, pick a thing.
Yeah.
Pick a thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only way that we can come out of the matrix is stop looking out for ourselves. It's it. That's the only way that I can think of.
Yeah.
But anyway, speaking of looking out for other people, why don't we go to our final closing section of this year Pop Culture Coffee Hour episode?
Yeah.
Pop
so
Culture
this is
Philanthropic Hour.
That's right. And again, like we've had a lot of things on our hearts the last couple of months. Dissatisfaction with social media has been one of them, but also just kind of like a desire to really double down on the things that Christians are supposed to do. So we've been ending every episode of Pop Culture Coffee Hour now by highlighting some level of just Christ-like love that exists in the world. And we've done some national programs and some big picture things, but this week we're going to highlight something very kind of small and neighborhood. It's the Saint Haralambos Agape Grocery, which is in Niles, Illinois, outside Chicago. And it's just like what's that?
I've been to that church. Have
you really?
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. I have never been to that church. We have that not in common. So it's a little parish outreach that this parish has done. They have, in the last few months, they have distributed more than 16 tons of groceries, which I think boggles the mind, just in terms of the amount of canned goods, fresh produce, whatever it is. They're really this is a community that's really doubling down on its call to love neighbor, especially in the midst of a very difficult time. And they've been doing all sorts of things. They have this grocery, this food pantry that's been delivering things. They have a drive-through that's been very COVID safe over the course of the last few months. They've also been doing a monthly soup kitchen. They're doing 1,200 hot meals a year. They've been doing a monthly Meals on Wheels, and they've been distributing meals to 10 seniors monthly. So it's kind of shotgun of getting groceries out there to people, but also more targeted things of finding, people who are shut in and delivering them food and doing it's good stuff. And I think there's a lot of national programs that are doing wonderful things, but there's also a lot of small little communities in their particular corner of the church that are doing wonderful things. And we got the link in the description. It's saintharalambosgoc.org. If you want to learn more, if you're in the neighborhood, you could potentially connect with them if you're in the Chicago Niles area. But I think it's important to realize that there are Christians who are taking this call up and just doing what Christ calls us to do. And, especially in a difficult year, I know I need to hear that and to kind of see examples of this, because it's easy to forget that wonderful people are doing wonderful things by the grace of God. And this is just one example of it. So, check out what Saint Haralambos Agape Grocery is doing. And if there's a way to do that in your neck of the woods, maybe.
Yeah. And please write us with other things that that are going on. We want to highlight stuff. We actually had somebody who we highlighted Family Promise a couple of weeks ago. I think maybe it was the Bill and Ted episode. I can't even remember. Might have been Cobra Kai, but
no, it was Cobra Kai. Last week we did
yeah.
prison ministry.
That's it.
Yeah.
But I had someone write to me saying that when they heard that, they donated money to Family Promise.
Awesome.
And yeah, so they reached out and gave a pretty substantial donation, and Family Promise reached back out being like, who are you people and why are you doing this? And
what?
Yeah. So someone's here. So yeah, I thought that was really cool though, that they reached out to thank and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, please let us know, and we want to support the work that anyone is doing out there. It's good, and it's good for the soul, to make this a regular part of our life. The prayer and fasting stuff, I think we do really well and kind of highlight that really well as a church and talk about it a lot as a church. But almsgiving is kind of like the follow through of a baseball swing. If you're not following through, you're not gonna get that ball very far. So we really do need all three to be in our lives.
Totally.
So.
And also, again, just as Christians who can be very jaded by the terrible state of affairs, like I say this just for myself personally, like it's good to hear that this happens.
Yes.
I think one of the difficult things about like having a vision for what we should be doing is getting down when it's not happening. But it's helpful to know that there are parishes like this across the world. Like there are nonprofits, there are communities, and like that's why like Christian said, like let us know, because we want to shine a light on this and just offer more encouragement and hopefully like just offer some inspiration for this. So that's it. That's
the end. That's the end of the Pop Culture Coffee Hour and a half.
Yeah. Do we know what we're doing next week? Next time?
I think it is a thing that is something and not a thing that is nothing.
Is it community? Are we doing community next?
I don't remember. I can't remember if we decided to do community. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone, hang loose. Just kind of keep talking amongst yourselves.
No, what we should do is just put it
we're doing the Christmas Chronicles 1 and 2.
Oh, that's right. On Netflix, right? Christmas Chronicles.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll put it in the description too. That's something I haven't done in the last couple of weeks. We'll put it in the description, homework for next time. So check it out. Join us in 2 weeks. And just remember, there is no spoon.